An increasing number of online business owners are looking to move abroad for lower taxes and better lifestyle, and these business owners include a lot of e-commerce business owners. So this video is going to be dedicated to e-commerce business owners, and I'm going to tell you why, despite of where you're moving in the world and despite where you're living in the world, why you should almost always have as your business structure, or at least as part of your business structure as an e-commerce business owner, is the US LLC. Because this is something that e-commerce business owners often don't consider properly. They will often just set their company up in the country where they live, or let's say you're moving abroad, you're setting up where you're moving to. However, often, and in fact almost always, despite the fact that you can do this, like you can run an e-commerce business with any business structure in the world, this is probably not going to be the best option. So in this video, I'm going to make the case for why almost every e-commerce business owner should have a US LLC, at least as part of your business structure, how this is in fact going to make more money and also help you with your international structuring, as well as saving on taxes, and to actually make your accounting, your compliance and everything like that much more simple than what you probably have now. The first reason is that it's very easy for foreigners to set up the US LLC. So you don't need to be a US resident, you don't need to be a US citizen, you don't need to have any kind of connection to the US to set up a US limited liability company. In fact, it is better if you don't have any connection to the US, as we'll discuss later on in the video. Because an interesting thing about the US is that the US is very, very aggressive towards its own residents, its own citizens, in terms of their filing requirements, in terms of their taxes and everything like that. However, you can use a US business structure as a US non-resident with no connection to the US, and they're actually going to be very, very lenient in terms of taxes, in terms of reporting, everything like that. And there are no extra requirements required for a non-US resident to set up a US LLC. It's just going to take slightly longer for it to be completely filed. You need to get what's called an EIN, a US employer identification number, and that just takes a bit longer for a non-US resident than a US resident, but that is about it. And you can file this LLC directly with whatever state that you're filing it with. Usually you would choose Wyoming or Delaware in some cases. I myself run 2 US LLCs, both of them are in Wyoming. However, for most people, I wouldn't recommend doing this on your own. I would recommend just using an agent to essentially handle it for you. The agent that I have used for both of my US LLCs and that I always recommend on this channel is Dula. They're one of the most reputable players in the market. What they essentially do is that they handle everything that you need to do in terms of filing the LLC. So there's no paperwork requirement on your part. They will complete all the documents and then just send them to you for signature, and your US LLC is going to be filed in a matter of days. They will then apply for your employer identification number for you on your behalf, and once you receive it, everything is ready to go, and you can set up your Mercury bank account, which is what I use for both of my LLCs. By the way, if you want to set one up, you can get $250 for free by clicking my link down below in the description, as well as your Stripe account to get your LLC up and running. However, that is not everything, because every year there are a couple of IRS filings that you're going to have to do for your LLC, and I would also highly recommend having Dula just handle this for you. If you choose at least their total compliance package, they will handle all of these filings for you on your behalf, so you don't need to worry about them. And in case you do them wrong, there are some very hefty fines starting at $25,000. So this is exactly why I don't recommend trying to do this on your own. And specifically for e-commerce business owners, they have recently announced their new package, the Business in a Box package, that includes everything that we just discussed to file your US LLC, as well as keep it completely compliant. But it also includes some crucial e-commerce analytics to help you also run your e-commerce business and make more money from it more efficiently. So if you want to use Dula services, you can get 10% off with my link down below in the description. And for e-commerce business owners, I highly recommend choosing the Business in a Box package. So that takes care of setting up the LLC. But obviously there are many different business structures that you could easily set up as a foreigner. So why specifically the US LLC? Well, the second reason, and probably the biggest reason, is going to be payment processing. So the issue you're going to come across with almost any other structure, especially if it's not a European or like a Western business structure, is that there's going to be a lot of declines that you're going to get from your customers, because for some reason a lot of these Western credit card companies like Visa, MasterCard, if they're being charged via a non-US company, especially if it's the US issued credit card, the probability that the bank is going to decline that charge is reasonably high. In the beginning, I was using a UAE company to charge money from customers, but the decline rates were so high that I was literally losing money until I did some research and realized that I could just set up a US LLC and use the US LLC to take payments from customers and then have that UAE company as my host holding company, which I used to get residency in the UAE. And with that, my declines went down by like 95%. And just by setting up a structure, I'm now making so much more money because I don't have those declines. On top of this, you're going to get high quality banking, US banking. You're going to get a US Stripe account, which is going to have the lowest payout times, the best features, everything like that. So as an e-commerce business owner, wherever you live, you might set up a local company just to get residency for yourself, or if you need to do that, and then have that company own your US LLC, and your US LLC is going to act essentially what's called a payment processing company to just take the payments and then you pay from that LLC to your holding company, or you can just hold it directly personally. With a US company, you're also going to get access to just the widest range of payment processing option. For example, if you use Shopify to sell your products, you can get access to Shopify payments, which is not available in most countries, and things like this. So this is going to be probably the biggest reason. In terms of the other reasons, reason number 3 is going to be that the US LLC is what's called a tax neutral setup. So what this means is that when you set up a US company, you might be worried about, well, I'm going to have to pay US taxes. Well, the answer is no. Like I said previously, the US is extremely aggressive when it comes to taxes towards their own residents and their own citizens, but they essentially don't seem to care if you use a US structure as a non-US resident, and that is specifically if you use the LLC structure. If you don't have any US employees, you yourself are not a resident of the US, you have essentially no connection to the US, or no what's called US effectively connected income, you are not going to be liable for any US corporate taxes at all. Now, the LLC is probably still going to be taxable wherever you actually run it from and where you live. What this gives you the benefit of is what's called a tax neutral setup, where the LLC itself is not going to be taxable in the country of registration. So you're still going to get access to US banking, US payment processing, everything like that, without needing to worry about taxes in the US. So that allows you to then choose where you live strictly based on lifestyle, like where you actually want to live. And you can still run a US company from wherever you're based and only worry about taxes in the country where you live. With many other business structures in many countries, the country of registration is still going to tax the company even if you don't live there, which leaves you in the annoying position of having to deal with taxes in both countries, both where you register your company as well as where you live. With the US LLC, you don't have to do that, so it simplifies your life in terms of taxes a lot, and this is why I really love it myself. Reason number 4 is light maintenance. So the US LLC not only gives you access to, again, this tier 1 business infrastructure, not only do they not give you any taxes as long as you don't have any employees, any warehouses, anything like that in the US, but you also don't have many requirements in terms of your annual filings and your compliance. There's just a couple of IRS forms that you're going to have to fill. They're very easy to fill, and again, if you use an agent like Doula to do this for you, they'll essentially just fill the form, ask you some questions about, okay, we need this and this and these details. It'll take you like 5 minutes to reply to their email, and then they will file the form, send it to you for signature. You're going to check that everything is correct, and then you're just going to sign it, and that is it. You have to do that once every single year. It's just a couple of forms, and that is it, and you don't need to worry about the IRS, the US government, anything like that throughout the year at any other point. You don't even have to do full accounting to the US, assuming again you don't have any US effectively connected income, although obviously you still probably have to do accounting wherever you actually manage this company from. And benefit number 5 is that you get to deal in US dollars. So assuming that you sell mainly in US dollars, let's say you're selling to the US market, which often e-commerce business owners are doing because US is the biggest consumer market in the world, the wealthiest market in the world, where if you sell to the US but you don't live in the US, you get the benefit of essentially selling to the wealthiest market but not having to incur the cost of living in the wealthiest market. The only problem that this brings in many cases is essentially foreign exchange. So let's say, for example, that you run a Singapore company, also a great business structure for many different cases, but in these particular cases, an e-commerce business owner selling to the US, the downside is going to be is that what's going to happen is that you're going to charge in US dollars because your customers are going to be used to getting charged in US dollars. So they're going to pay in US dollars, and then there's going to be a currency conversion from US dollars to Singapore dollars, which is going to be the home currency of your company in the payment process, or like Stripe or whatever you're using. And then you're going to get paid in Singapore dollars to your company with like a 1% fee charged or something like that. And then let's say you have your expenses in US dollars again, like you use many different services online that are charged in US dollars. You're again going to have to convert those Singapore dollars into US dollars. So you get this double conversion. So you lose those foreign currency fees every single time. Now, if you have a US LLC, you get charged in US dollars, you get paid directly in US dollars to your Stripe account, then you get paid in US dollars to your bank account, and then you get to pay any US dollar expenses, like you have subscriptions, like, I don't know, ChatGPT or like whatever subscriptions you have in US dollars. And then let's say your home currency, obviously it might not be US dollars, then you convert from US dollars into your home currency. But there again, because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, often, now not always, but often you're going to get more favorable exchange rate with the US dollar compared to some other currencies. For example, in the UAE where I am based, because the UAE dirham and the US dollar are pegged to each other. When I'm exchanging US dollars to AED or vice versa, the exchange rate that I get is often very, very favorable. In fact, with my UAE bank accounts, I can often hold US dollars directly in those bank accounts. And by the way, often in many countries, you can also do that. And when I want to convert my US dollars to my local currency, the exchange fee is going to be very, very small. So this is not always the case. Let's say you don't sell to the US, but you sell, for example, mainly to Europe. Absolutely, you might consider perhaps a European company structure. Or if you sell in Asia, maybe the Singapore company does make more sense. So this is not always the case, but this is assuming that a big market for you is the US market. Then having a US structure is going to give you this foreign exchange benefits. So those are the reasons why in many cases I would highly recommend setting up a US LLC. If you're an e-commerce business owner, it's very, very affordable to set up, and in most cases it's going to pay for itself multiple times over with the lower decline rates, better payment processing fees, no FX fees and things like that. And it's often going to simplify your life a lot and allow you to save on taxes as well. Now, if you're interested in finding out exactly how to set up this US LLC, what does the process exactly look like, then I highly recommend you watch this video right here. So watch that video next, and I will see you in the next one.